Hi, so we're looking at Safeguarding and Protecting Vulnerable Individuals unit again today. Now, we're looking at the last learning outcome, which is learning outcome 4. Now, this is understand how to review procedures and practice that promote safeguarding of vulnerable individuals. Now, there are 2 assessment criteria here. 4.1, assess the importance of the involvement of individuals in the review of systems and procedures in services. And 4.2, review of work settings, procedures and practice against current legislation and policy in relation to safeguarding and protecting vulnerable individuals. So let's get into our PowerPoint. Just give it a moment to load. So on the first couple of slides, we're just going to look at what reviewing performance is, because this learning outcome is all about how you make reviews. So we know that when we're carrying out reviews, it'll actually give us a confirmation about whether or not this health and safety arrangements actually make sense in your workplace. So you'll be able to check the validity of your health and safety policy. You'll be able to ensure the system that you've got in place for managing health and safety is actually effective, that there's no shortcomings in this. And you'll be able to see what has changed about the health and safety environment in your business and possibly reflect upon that. So this will actually help you to stop doing things that you don't actually need to do. So it'll cut out lots of unnecessary procedures or practices that it might just be time consuming that actually don't even need to be done. And it'll give you time to actually respond to new risks and adapt for those. So reviewing and also asking for individuals' input, so your staff, your colleagues, your patients, their input, it'll actually give you the opportunity to celebrate and promote your health and safety successes. And on the flip side, also to address and identify any areas that are in the grey area that actually might need addressing, that might need changing. And then also third parties are actually requiring partner organizations to report health and safety performance statistics publicly now. So it'll help you to meet up with those standards. Now, the most important aspect of reviewing is that it'll actually close the loop. So like I said previously, it'll help you to identify any gaps. It'll give you an opportunity to address those gaps and also those shortcomings and to fix them in other ways. So the outcomes of your review will become what you plan to do next with your health and safety. So now that we've talked about what reviewing performance is, we'll go on to 4.1. So 4.1 is assess the importance of the involvement of individuals in the review of systems and procedures in services. So why is it important to review your procedures and your systems? Why does that actually need to be done? Now, here are a number of reasons. So old policies might be non-compliant. They might not be keeping up with the new laws or the regulations. They'll just be out of date. It'll ensure that your policies are consistent and effective, so you're actually all following the same pattern. Regular reviews will also keep your organization up to date with regulations, technology, and also industry practices. And then you'll also be able to gain input from people using the policies daily. You know, so you'd see what works and what doesn't. Sitting behind the desk and paper pushing is different to actually working on the floor and doing your work. So what somebody behind the desk might think is valid and doable, somebody who's actually physically doing the job may or may not think is valid or doable. So gaining their input is extremely important. It'll help you to tweak your services, tweak your practices and procedures. It will also help you to challenge any practice. Now, unsafe practices is what we're going to talk about now. So any practice that puts an individual or a care worker at risk is considered unsafe. So unsafe practice includes not wearing personal protective equipment, not undertaking risk assessments, and also ignoring strategies to manage risk. Then unsafe practice can also result from insufficient resources. So you might not have proper equipment, lack of time, you might have shortage of staff, you might have operational difficulties, you might have lack of training, poor leadership, or lack of staff supervision. So all of these things put together, along with not doing risk assessments and ignoring strategies that are being put into place to manage risks, can lead to unsafe practices. So identifying these will help you to challenge this practice. And then whistleblowing and protected disclosures. Now, this is also challenging practice. So whistleblowing is a term used when a worker provides information to their employer of something that's happening that is wrong. So it might be a person that's doing something wrong. It might be systematical errors that are going on, something that's not been addressed and they're trying to address. Now, the wrongdoing will usually, but not always, be related to something that they have witnessed at work. So it could be something that you witnessed elsewhere that's not at your work, but on a major basis, it is normally to do with your workplace. Now, a protected disclosure is actually a qualifying disclosure. It's under the Employment Rights Act of 1996, and this is something that is made by the worker when they reasonably believe that there's some serious wrongdoing happening within the place. Now, these protected disclosures will actually protect the employee. So this typically relates to some form of dangerous or illegal activity that the person has witnessed at work. Now, we've got the Public Interest Disclosure Act of 1998. And now the Public Interest Disclosure Act is an act of the Parliament in the UK that protects whistleblowers from detrimental treatment by the employer. So they can't be unfairly dismissed or biased against, they can't be treated unfairly. So it just gives the person who may have made a disclosure, who may have brought up an area that wasn't being addressed or was dangerous, it'll give them some protection from having any repercussions made towards them. So that was 4.1. Now we're going to make our way onto 4.2. Now 4.2 is review a work settings procedures and practices against current legislation and policy in relation to safeguarding and protecting vulnerable individuals. Now we're just going to do a bit of a cap on what the legislations are in relation to safeguarding adults first. So we've got the Care Act of 2014. So this places a general duty on local authorities to promote the well-being of individuals when their support is being carried out. Got the Sexual Offences Act of 2003. Now, there have been issues in the past where there have been difficulties when bringing prosecutions against people under this act, which is why this has been brought about. So the difficulties were that people who had committed sexual offences against people with mental disorders were not being acquitted, or it was difficult to actually identify and say this is what happened. Now, this act has been put into place. So the Sexual Offences Act, SOA, 2003 has modernized the law by prohibiting any sexual activity. So any sexual activity that's between a care worker and a person within a mental disorder, while that person is under the care of the care worker, it cannot happen. There cannot be any sexual activity there at all. So it prohibits it completely. Then you've got Protection of Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act 2006. Now the SVGA for short, it was passed to help to avoid harm or risk of harm, and it does this by preventing people who are deemed unsuitable to work with children and vulnerable adults from gaining access to them through their work. Now we know in a basic way that when you apply for a job, especially where you're going to be working with vulnerable people or young people and coming into contact with these people, you're having a DBS checked. That's a basic thing. That's one part of it. And then you've got this act over here as well. And then again, we come back onto the Public Interest Disclosure Act of 1998. So the important part of providing care is to ensure a working environment that encourages people to challenge practices. So this law offers some protection from victimization to people who blow the whistle under the Act, like we mentioned earlier. Now, coming on to the reviewing section of this, so we've just done a little recap of what sort of legislations are there to safeguard adults. Now, we're just going to look at how we're going to review your procedures and practice. So we know that actually physically writing the policy is the easiest part. HR department will go ahead, they look at the legislations, and they'll put into place policies that will reflect legislation and also your own setting. Implementing, communicating, and reviewing these documents is actually an ongoing process. And now this is really essential for ensuring that your policies, your practices, and your procedures are effective to make sure they're up to date and that you're actually following what trends are happening at the moment, what the procedures are at the moment. So some ways that you can do this is by making recommendations to staff and management of any proposals for improvement. So you might have an idea. So you don't necessarily, it doesn't have to be somebody who's only in management that can do this. It can be any person that's within the workplace. You can make recommendations, something that will reflect, you know, that you do a certain procedure. If you identify a particular way that can be done, which will cut the time in half and still be safe and viable to do, you can make recommendations to your management and put proposals in place for an improvement. Monitoring for out-of-date practice and any changes in legislation is also important. And then also by carrying out annual audits of policies and reviewing them and seeing what sort of findings you can get from these will actually help you to identify the gaps and also help you to work towards improvements that can be proposed and implemented. Having regular meetings to gain input on procedures and practices. I know that whenever you sit down with your staff, there'll be a million things that somebody will come up. There'll be something, an idea or a tip or a proposal that somebody can say, right, I do this on a daily basis, but I feel that if we do X, Y, and Z instead, we'll have a better procedure, we'll cut down the time in half, or we'll have better patient care. So just having meetings, getting people's input, finding out what they think is very important. So you can discuss and review any changes or any areas that you feel might need changing. On a simpler version, and this is something that might actually save time as well, because it's very difficult when you're on a busy day, management might be busy, staff might be busy, you might be over and short staffed. Having something as simple as a suggestion box is really good to have. Now, if you're working and you realize, right, I've got this particular idea I want to pop down, but I can't go around chasing Deborah from HR to try and go and see what we can do or give her my idea. You just pop the idea down, write it down, pop it into the suggestion box, and then once a month it can get opened up, and then those suggestions are there. So when you've got your meetings in place, you can pull that suggestions out of the box and see, right, somebody wrote this down, or what do you think, Jen? Is this the right thing? Or what do you think, Phil? Was this the right sort of, do you still agree with this? And just ask them to reiterate. And it also helps people to remember what they've written down. And then carrying out regular reviews, so where you review your practices and procedures against policies. So when you're carrying out these reviews, and I know we mentioned this a little bit a couple of slides ago, now the point of these reviews is just to see what is happening. So when you're carrying out these reviews, do these actual policies meet the requirements set? You know, are they reflecting the legislations that you've used? Are the policies reflecting your own workplace? Does something need changing? Do you need to update your practices? And does your policy need to be changed to reflect current practice systems? So it'll help you to identify and improve what your own practices are. It'll also help you to make sure that you're not using out-of-date practices. Your policies don't need updating. So reviewing is extremely important. So that was 4.2. So in a nutshell, today we've looked at So we've assessed the importance of the involvement of individuals when we're reviewing systems and procedures. So we looked at how important it is to get every member of staff to chip in, really. We've looked at how to challenge practice. We looked at the summary of legislation. So we looked at what sort of legislations are in place to safeguard adults. And then we looked at how to make recommendations to staff and management of any proposals that might be there for improvement.